So I think we're ready to go. So good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us here tonight for this conversation with director and writer Tyresha Poe from Selah and the Spades. Thank you for being here. And also I'd like to welcome executive producer Chaz Ebert.
Hello, thank you.
So I just want to start, the film premiered last year in 2019 at the Sundance Film Festival, and last Friday just started streaming on Amazon Prime. So this seemed like great timing. I mean, both in terms of the streaming launch as we're all staying safely at home to watch the film and have this conversation with you to talk about your both entertaining and I think thought-provoking film. So Tyresha and Chaz, thank you for being with us here tonight. I hope you're both staying well, and I was hoping you could tell the audience where you're calling in from.
I'm in Brooklyn right now, where I currently reside.
Great.
I'm at an undisclosed location.
The Bahamas.
Yeah.
So Tyresha, congratulations on the positive reception to the film. There's been so many fantastic reviews and it's also well-deserved. So just a little bit of protocol. I'm gonna start off with some questions for you both about the film and your involvement in it and your artistic perspectives. And then for the audience, as questions come to you, please type them in the chat box on the YouTube channel and we'll ask them as they come up. So let's get to it. So I'm going to start with Tyresha. So when watching Selah and the Spades, I was thinking about, it struck me as a very literary film in many ways. A lot of it is the language that the characters use, particularly Selah, you can tell she's incredibly well read. And also just kind of the full world that you create. It feels, like I said, very literary, very built out, very layered. I know that you've spoken extensively about the film influences for Selah. You know, we love that it's like a mashup of like a teen drama, a gangster film, and many others. But first I was wondering if you could talk maybe about some of the literary influences or the inspirations for the film, and particularly maybe for the character of Selah.
Oh, for sure. Love that. I have a lot, but Selah is, well, the world overall is very influenced by my love of a couple of books. The Secret History by Donna Tartt is one of them. That's a huge one for me. And just the brutality with which she allows her characters to engage with each other. I find it to be really horrifying and fascinating, like a car crash, kind of. Yeah. And then The Basic Eight by Daniel Handler is another one for the same reason. Again, that brutality of these youthful characters, particularly in a school environment. And then also this book called Oreo by Fran Ross, which came out in the 70s, I want to say. And it's this odyssey of this teenage girl going from her home in Philadelphia to find her father in New York. And it's just very funny and witty and brilliant and filled with like puns and wordplay and all of the stuff that I love. So I'd say those are three big influences, particularly Oreo on being an influence, Oreo the character being an influence for Selah. What else? Gosh, those are the big, wait, hold on. There's one more that I know. Oh, this book, Election by Tom Perrotta. I think that's his name. I think that's his name. They turned it into a movie starring Reese Witherspoon and, God, what's his name? Ferris Bueller. Matthew Broderick.
Yeah.
That's a huge one on that book. And the way that Tracy speaks in that, Tracy Flick, the main character, speaks in that book was a big inspiration for me. I really love that book. So those are a few of them, but I could go on forever. The movie is, I really, like, the movie's very literary and has been from its inception.
Yeah, I was actually hoping you could talk about your process in terms of writing it. I found that really interesting.
Yeah, I started out by writing short stories because I didn't know how to write a feature film, but I knew how to write short stories. And I knew how to do things like take photographs of people. So I wrote every day for a month in 2013. Every day for a month, I wrote a short story about Selah and her life, her world, these factions, the school. And then the following summer, I took about 14 of those and I turned them into some of them I kept as short stories, some of them I turned into these photo stories, some of them I made into short films, and I put them together into this project called Selah and the Spades and Overture. And
Okay.
so it was on this, I made this website, and they were just vignettes, chapter by chapter, that you could sort of explore to get a sense of this world and these people.
Great. Yeah. And how did you end up then like bringing it all together into kind of a single continuous narrative after that?
A lot of work. There's so many drafts, which was great. I really like to rewrite things. I find rewriting to be very difficult, but very pleasurable. Because I feel like the hardest thing to do is just writing the first draft. That's the thing that's the scariest part, or the most daunting task. So it just writing, just like a lot of writing and rewriting and reworking the ideas and killing off some characters and then bringing them back, and just like so many different versions of potential stories. And even through the edit, we were still writing in the edit by editing the film in a different way than it was written. And I really like that part of filmmaking, editing.
So I guess I maybe had read that you were a photographer, but kind of some of the inspiration for Paloma and the way that she starts to interact with the kids she's new to that world. Is that something that's familiar to you?
Definitely. I really got into photography and filmmaking when I went to my second high school, which was a boarding school in New Jersey.
Okay.
Yeah. And so it was this combination of being a new kid in this very insular world and being like naturally kind of shy, especially at that age. And in my photography and film classes, realizing that if I put a camera in between me and the other person that I was trying to talk to, suddenly I felt so much less shy, and I felt so much more sure of myself and so much more confident. And so I really do think that I view and have viewed for most of my life, I viewed the camera as like an extension of myself. Like it's so much easier for me to be myself when I have like something that I'm telling a story with.
Right.
Like being me. I guess that makes sense.
And so I was going to ask, and that translates into filmmaking.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I honestly, I mean, I'm learning this more the more that I write, and like now that I'm working on other projects that aren't Selah and the Spades, I really feel like I understand this better now, that I'm just making movies so that I can kind of understand the world better. Like it's honestly just, I'm just trying to like understand why people do the things that we do. People, including myself, I'm trying to understand why I do the stuff that I do. I don't get it. So maybe this is just like a really expensive version of therapy, but I think other people can benefit from it. So that's okay.
Great. Yeah. So
may I ask
yes.
her a question? I am, the characters are so richly drawn.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one, I remember at one point you actually took us into Paloma's house.
Yeah.
And then you decided not to. I'm wondering about that choice, showing a little bit more about Paloma's background.
Yeah, so originally we went to, Paloma's a day student where everybody, or most of the other people who we're interacting with, are boarders at this school. And so when we followed Paloma home from school one day, and we got this glimpse of life outside of Haldwell, and we got this glimpse of life with parents at home and what that feels like to go home and have to tell your parents about your day, I found that I didn't care about the parents. Like I couldn't reason, like it felt like going home gave her dad, who was the character that was with her at home, so much weight in like the cuts of the film that we kept those scenes in, that it took away from the girls, and it took away from their relationship, and it took away from the tension within the world of school. And so quite honestly, it was just, we only had 2 hours or like an hour and a half or whatever it was. It's like, gotta cut this out, which is so hard, because that was one of the hardest days of production, and then we cut all of it out. But it was beautiful.
So
Well,
I,
you certainly
oh,
made a beautiful movie.
Oh, thank you.
great. So Chaz, I know we talked a little bit about one of the things that drew you to the film was that it definitely defies like any one genre categorization, and isn't sticking strictly to any genre conventions. So I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit and talk about the other qualities that particularly drew you to the project and at what point you got involved.
Well, I have to say that what initially drew me to the film was the number one, it was about a strong young Black woman, but it was being presented by two strong young Black women, Tyresha and the producer, Lauren McBride. It was on the strength of their pitch of this project at Sundance. We were at an event, a gathering called the Catalyst Forum. And at the Catalyst Forum, they have what are called creative investors. And then we have people who are pitching movies. There were 6 groups pitching documentaries and 6 groups pitching narrative features. And they just really sold this movie. When they were talking, I could tell that they knew this world that they were going to be filming, which is important. I could also tell that they were going to make a movie where the strong woman is kind of unapologetic. You know, they're sitting around this table and there are 5 factions that sort of remind you of The Godfather, you know, and the Gambinos, and everybody sitting around in these factions, they're going to, you know, divide all of the power. And she is unapologetic about it. And that, you know, I think you had a script at that point or something. I forget exactly what you had, but you really sold it. That's, you know.
Got all of our funding from that event. So that was a dream come true. That community that came out of that, honestly, it made such a huge difference. It made a huge difference to raise our funds from a group of people who believed in us.
Yes.
And who believed, more importantly, in the story, and who just wanted to support us to make this story that we wanted to make, as opposed to one investor or like one company who sort of held control over the project in a way. So I'm so incredibly grateful to have what I think is kind of a unique first feature experience, in having that. I mean, honestly, it was like a coalition was just supporting us and just like lifting us up with their mentorship and their kind words. It really felt, I don't know if this sounds trite, but at times when we would like send out our little updates during production and stuff, it sort of felt like we were emailing like our family and like our parents and just updating them about summer camp, even though it was obviously like this business.
I have to tell you, I was excited every time I'd open my computer and if there was an update, whether it had photographs or just, you know, written update. It was really exciting. It was like getting, I'm not going to say like a Christmas letter, but yeah. It, you know, more
feeling to it.
Yeah. But it was something exciting. The other thing is, this is important because this was a unique situation. This is the first time this had ever been done at Sundance, where the Catalyst Forum got together and fully funded a project before the filmmakers left. That had never happened before. And I don't know if it's happened since your film either, but we just decided, let's do this so that let's support the filmmaker so that the filmmaker can leave here knowing that they can make the film that she wants to make and not have to go out and do a lot of, you know, asking around, trying to raise money. That I have to tell you, I'm really proud to have been part of that process. And the other thing that for me that was important in choosing which film to fully support, I had to see a future for the filmmaker.
Yeah.
And when I saw Tyresha and Lauren as a team, it doesn't mean that there'll be a team on every movie or every project, but I could see a future when I saw them. And that was important. You know, you have your first movie, but I could see the second, and I could see a series, or I could see the third. And that was very important too.
That's great. So I want to come back a little bit, like as Chaz mentioned, one of the things that really drew her was this like strong, young African-American woman who is the lead. But I think one of the things that's also so compelling is she's this incredibly complex character that, I mean, she's incredibly charismatic, but she's also completely manipulative. We see her in moments of strength where she's asserting and very clearly asserting control, even through the direct address to the camera, but also then in relation to her mother, where, you know, she's more subservient and takes the back seat and is clearly apologetic for something that we're not quite sure what. And so, you know, one of, I guess, my questions was, I have a question from the audience that is curious about Selah and how you see her. She asks, this is from Rihanna Jackson, is she a psychopath, a sociopath, or do you see her as normal? Is she asexual? And also for her, it was a bit disturbing to see the kids, you know, portrayed as drug dealers. But I was wondering if you could talk about kind of developing kind of this very complex character that's neither black nor white, good nor bad. I mean, there's things that we're drawn to about her, and her assertiveness is one of them, but it's the question of how she uses that.
Yeah, that's a good complex question. I always knew from the very first story that I ever wrote about this character that she was a drug dealer. I always knew from the beginning. That was important to me because I knew that I was going to have this character do things that would be morally questionable, that didn't really have anything to do with being a drug dealer. But it just like, she has, like, as you're saying, she understands her power over others and isn't afraid to use it to manipulate others to get what she wants, or to, she's not afraid to lash out against others if she feels that it's warranted. So knowing that I was going to ask her to do those things that would have us questioning her morality, I wanted to begin the story by having her be in a position that we tend to think is more, not we as in me, but that the world tends to paint it as a morally degrading position, I guess is the best way to say it, being a drug dealer, selling drugs. But I mean, to be quite frank, in my life, I've known people who've sold drugs who are great people. And it really bugs me, and I think is actually incredibly detrimental to associate this action that, when you think about it, is at the end of the day just participating in capitalism, and which now is becoming legal and is like legal in a lot of places and soon will probably be federally legal. And yet there are plenty of people sitting in jail for the rest of their life for selling marijuana, for instance. So I think that it's really detrimental to, I think it's really damaging to, I think for me, it's damaging to hold this idea in media that selling drugs leads to a person being a bad person. I think that that's just an action. You live in a capitalist society, you have a product and you're going to sell it. That is reality. And so that's why I made them drug dealers, quite honestly. And also, yeah, that's why I made them drug dealers. But in terms of this question of if she's a psychopath or a sociopath, that's a really good question, because initially when I started writing the character, I thought that she was. But the fascinating thing about writing is that if you start by writing, which is how I like to start, by focusing on the details of people, focusing on like their likes and dislikes, focusing on how they feel about the smell of like grass, I don't know, just like focusing on these little minute details of a human being, then as you begin the process of actually writing their story, you'll find that those characters will tell you who they are and they'll reveal themselves to you. So even though I began the story thinking, oh, this is clearly a story about a teenage sociopath, Selah sort of proved to me that she wasn't, and that there's like a lot more going on here and that it's more complex than that. And as that became apparent to me in my writing, that was just so much, like, that was a more fascinating story for me at this time. I'm really fascinated by stories of sociopaths, really fascinated. But I think that I'm just more interested in whatever this thing is that Selah is. And she's 17, so she doesn't even know what she is yet. She's a kid. She's changing, she's growing. So that's, but then I also forget the other question. Oh, asexual. Her asexual, or her sexuality. In writing since the beginning, Selah being asexual was a facet of my writing process. Same with Paloma being, I mean, I guess pansexual. Paloma just being very open sexually speaking in terms of her sexuality, or being very open in terms of her sexuality. But it's not a movie about sexuality. And so I'm like hesitant to even talk about their sexuality because I'm the creator, and at some point I have to let things go, and the audience has to decide for themselves like what people are, like what these things mean. And I can't just tell you these things are this and therefore this is this. So yeah, when I wrote it, yes, she was asexual. When we directed it, we talked about that, and that was an important conversation that Lovey and I had. But you know, it's not a movie about sexuality, so I also don't want to make it seem as though I'm saying this movie represents asexual people, because I feel like representation is more than that.
It also occurred to me that, you know, she's really about kind of controlling her body, her future, her destiny, and that's kind of one expression of that as well.
Yeah, I also think that Selah, again, these are kids. Like, they're really young. I think that Selah doesn't have the language for what she is yet.
Right. And so I'm going to go on to a question that's related to that in terms of her, like you said, she's 17-year-old. She's between childhood and adulthood. But at this end, you know, we see these different sides of her, the light and the dark. But at that one point, when she's home with her mother tells the fable of the scorpion and the frog, right? Which in some ways she's saying, I know who you are and I need to help you because your nature is like that of the scorpion, where you'll hurt other people, even if it is detrimental to yourself. Which also makes me think, is that some kind of philosophy on the possibility for change? And actually feeds into another question from an audience member, CC Mac. She says, hi, Tyresha. I remember a Q&A you mentioned how important it was that Selah learned lessons on her own, but also wasn't alone at the end. So also, could you speak a little bit more about that choice? Because, I mean, for me watching it, you want to believe that there's hope for Selah, but it's also slightly ambiguous. So,
it's so ambiguous, which can be frustrating, even for me. There are times when I watch this movie and it gets to the end and I'm like, wait, what? You're telling me that's how I ended it? And then there are times when I watch it and I get to the end and I'm like, yes, that's right. So it's honestly just dependent on my mood that day. But I think that particularly when it comes to young or portrayals of young Black people, we are often, at least I feel as though we've been sort of conditioned to expect punishment, or to expect punishment if they act out. That's just part of stories that I've seen. And sometimes that punishment leaves them, this sounds so vague, but sometimes that punishment just means that they have lost everyone they love, or they have experienced this trauma and are alone. And there were times when I was a teenager when I felt as though because I didn't have the like appropriate language for my like overwhelming emotional experience, or just like I was just lashing out, or I just seemed angry, but in reality I just didn't have the words for all the teenage emotions that I was feeling. Because of that experience, I felt really alone at times. And so when I was making this movie, I knew from the beginning that it was very important for me that no matter what Selah did in the film, at the end, she wouldn't have to face it alone. And that's hard, but I feel like it's very, I think it's true to life. I think there are so many times when people who we love lash out and hurt us and we don't leave them behind because we know that they can do better. And what I love about the ending as it is now is that Selah is a person who's constantly telling other people, you need to be thinking about your potential. You need to be thinking about what you can achieve, what you can accomplish. If you can just be bigger and better and be like me and do it my way. Look at what you can be. Look at what you're capable of. And I feel like in a way, Maxie and Paloma choosing to, take her in the center of them and walk with her at the end is almost like them saying, you need to be thinking about your potential for being a little bit better. And you need to be thinking about your potential for being with us instead of always trying to lead us. That was important. And that's why I think that the end of that film works for me more often than it doesn't work for me. It's because it's an image of the three of them together as equals. And for Selah, I think that is an important realization that she doesn't need to lead, that she doesn't need to be the best, that she doesn't need to be perfect, that she doesn't need to be the one coming up with the next plan. She can just be supported. And I think that Selah is somebody who it's very hard for her to ask for help and to accept help. And so I do view that end as ambiguous and as messed up as it is. I view it as her and them saying, we don't know what's going on now. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but right now we're going to help each other walk off of this place or walk away from this place. Right. And that to me is just, I want people to feel like they can mess up and not be abandoned.
I was wondering how much of the story came from any experiences that you had when you were in boarding school, or is it all pretty much just fiction?
It's pretty much all fiction. It's mostly all fiction. It's mostly all fiction, but like the experience of like having a really close male friend, but not being like being in a very platonic relationship, and then having this weird rift happen when that friend starts dating somebody, and suddenly it's like we don't have time for all of our friendship stuff because now there's the girlfriend stuff. I remember that feeling from being a teenager and not knowing how to even talk about it, because I felt as though when I tried to talk about it, people would just say, oh, you just have a crush on him and you just want to date him instead. But it's like, no, it's about, this is my friend, like this is my person. And so a lot of this, like the central conflict of the story is born out of just being like a person who feels very intensely for her friends and just like I really love my friends. And I value my relationships with them as much as I do my romantic ones, as much as I do my familial ones, because they are, to me, they're my family. And so that being able to express that or show that in a story about teenagers was important for me, because sometimes you're just friends, and so, like, that's enough. That drama is enough, and that emotional intensity is enough. You don't even need to sugarcoat it with romance. You don't need to sugarcoat it with sexual stuff. It's just that friendship alone can cause so much emotion in us. And I think that that's healthy to admit it. And I think that when we do admit it to ourselves, we find that we get more value from our friendships, because we accept that that's like, those are soulmates. So that was very much that's something that is very true to me. But in terms of like the factions and things, we were not that organized. We were not that organized. We were busy. We had class. So I don't know how these kids have time to do this.
So I'm very curious about the world that you build in the film. You know, it has just such a distinctive look and style, from the saturated color palette to really that lush kind of the Arcadian grounds, the forest around and the clearings. And in some ways you create a world that feels other or removed, at times very dreamlike. Which is also contrasted with the kind of the more realistic relationships or the problems that the students, that your cast of characters are dealing with. So I have a couple of questions around that. The first one is from an audience member, and this hadn't even occurred to me, which is great. So why no technology in the film? Not a phone, a laptop, a computer, anywhere. Was this supposed to be a timeless parable? Which, you know, I think that's part of the world that you build. So could you talk about kind of that choice to not include contemporary technology?
Totally. So it It's a cool question because it was written that way to only have or to be a little bit timeless. But then in production, there was this one scene that we ended up cutting because of other reasons, where you can see one of those. You remember those Mac desktop computers that were all the different colors?
Yeah.
So we had one of those in that scene, and it was like, okay, if we have this, everybody will know exactly the time period that it is because that's so specific. But then once we cut that out, it just became like, whoa, when is this happening? And I just loved that feeling. And I was like, this is how it should feel, because it doesn't really matter when it's happening, because this something like this is always happening. Like you're always going to have these moments with your friends. This sort of tale of power in high school is always happening. It has always been happening from the beginning of teenagers. So I like that sort of timeless feeling to it, but I don't even think of it as a timeless sort of, I don't think of it as a timeless setting. I almost feel like it's more like, it's like you're constantly almost getting it. Like you're constantly almost knowing exactly when it happens, and it's always just like right out of your reach. And I like that feeling.
Excuse me, I have to leave for just 1 second. I can't believe I'm losing power.
Oh,
Okay.
go.
I will be right back.
Yeah. So the timelessness, I think, for me at least, lets me focus on the story more. And then also just selfishly, I'm still trying to figure out, for me as a filmmaker, what cell phones look like on screen. And until I figure that out, I won't have one in a movie. But I'm working on it.
I'm going to come back and talk when Chaz gets back about your work with the cinematographer and the production designer. I know Chaz has a connection with Jomo. So
Yeah.
But one of the other things that I think really caught my attention, or that I was taken with, was kind of the music and the soundscape of the film. Could you talk a little bit about the musical choices, which are also kind of contemporary and timeless at the same time, that combination, and also working with your composer, Oscar?
Yeah. The musical choices for the songs in the movie, I really wanted to, throughout the film and all of the choices that were made, we always said to each other, what is the emotional reality of what's going on in this scene as opposed to the actual reality of it? And so it was important that the music matched the emotional reality of each moment. Oh, you're back. And so, for instance, in that party scene, in the first party scene where they sneak out of the dorm at night and go into the party in the construction site, and there's that song by the Hi-Lo's playing, I think it is. And it's like this sort of dreamy 1950s-ish era, whatever, music. We wanted to have the feeling of, you know, that Willy Wonka song, Pure Imagination, where you're sort of just like, whoa. And it feels like a little bit trippy, but also very soothing in the midst of this chaotic, colorful environment. So I wanted to have that feeling there, for instance.
Yeah.
So it's very much like choosing music that would fit the emotional moment, even if it felt anachronistic or whatever. And then working with Asuka, it was really fun because she's somebody who, when you say to her, I really like the sounds of everyday life and I want to incorporate those into the project, she just gets really excited about that. So that's my favorite thing. And the example I always like to bring up is the music or the score in the scene with the Spirit Squad in the gym. A lot of that is composed of the sounds of their sneakers on the floor or their skirts swishing as they dance, or like their exhalations. Like there's a lot of cool stuff that she does with just people's breath work. So working with her was cool. Working with her is really cool. She's really cool just as a person. And I really loved her work on Crystal Moselle's films, Skate Kitchen and Wolfpack. That was how I got introduced to her work, Asuka's work. Yeah.
Great.
And I had to leave for a second, and I know that before I left, Mimi was talking about the cinematography, and I don't know if you have to give a shout out to Jomo Spray, the cinematographer, because he was an Ebert Fellow at one time. And I think that I first met him at Film Independent, and then he was, I think he won the Ebert Prize there, and then he won something else, but he also won an award at Sundance very early on. I think he's has an amazing eye. So can you talk about him a bit?
He's a genius. I hope he's watching. I'll never say this to his face. No, I'm just kidding. I tell him all the time. But no, Joe was a genius. It's like very clear to me. We met through Terrence Nance, who's another EP on the film, and I, a friend and a mentor. A few years ago, like 5 years ago, maybe 4 years ago now. And we started working together then on this project. And so we speak the same language, which is like a mixture of academia, Pan-Africanism, and pop culture, quite honestly. So we come from very similar households, I think, and similar environments. But Jomo is somebody who he's never gonna push something on the film because it looks good. Like, he's never gonna say, oh, we have to do this shot because it just looks so good. Like, he'll never do that. He'll never like try to sell you a shot just because it looks good. That's just not how he thinks. His brain is always thinking about what is best for the story right now. And that in a collaborator is like the best thing that you could ask for, because that's what we're all there for, is whatever, we're all there to do whatever is best for this story. And so working with Jomo was very easy. I think that's the best word for it. It's just very fun and easy. And I think it's because, not just because he's there for the story, but also because he's so down to experiment and just try something that might not work and just try it and see what happens. And I think that when you have collaborators who are there for the story and who are ready to play and experiment and have fun with things and not just like stick to a set list of shots that you've already discussed, you've already planned, you've already talked about it. I can't tell you the number of times Jomo walked onto set after I've had rehearsal with the actors and I look at him and I'm just like, throughout the shot list, not gonna work. Everything is different. I'm sorry. And also we cut half the scene, so we have to make it work. And he was just like, okay, Tyresha, let's do it. So I really think that he is somebody who, I think that he
is really, he's so talented,
yeah.
he's so creative, and he's not someone that you just put in a box.
Oh,
I see longevity for him too.
Because he's also so, he's always trying to better himself. Like, he's always trying to learn. He's never showing up to a place and saying, I am the person with the authority here and I know the most and I don't really need your advice. He's always just trying to learn from other people, and not just other cinematographers, but just people. He's just trying to listen and learn and use that to become better. It's really impressive to watch him work, and also to watch him collaborate with his team. Like, I find that he is an exceptional leader because his commitment to ensuring that folks who work in camera are not just, the same old crop of dudes. Like, I'm really, it's true. He's really dedicated to that. And I don't think that that's true for all cinematographers. And it's really important because camera can be a very gendered department, as we know.
I have another question because it made me think about having to pivot as a first-time director. Mm-hmm. So you had something on the page and you knew, because you were the creator. I love watching work by a writer director. Mm-hmm. But you had something on the page, and then you had these actors show up. And what Lovey Simone brings to the project, and Jarrell Jerome, when you, as they, and also Hunter Hall, as you are watching and directing them, how did that change what you had, your vision on the page with what they were bringing to the project?
It was always better, always. Like, even if it wasn't what I expected, it was better because it felt more alive. I mean, it felt alive, period. It was very important to me from day zero to ensure that all those kids who were becoming these characters knew that I was down to goof around, I guess is the best way to say it. Like it was very important to me to just like, again, create an environment that felt fun for them, because I wanted them to know that they could always speak up and they could always say, Tyresha, what if we did this? Or like, what if I did this? Like, can I just show you something? And so some of the most thrilling moments on set were when Lovey or Celeste or Jarrell would say in between setups, like they would just come over to me and they would say, okay, I'm thinking of this thing for this scene. And then they would look at me as I'm listening and then they would just say, no, I'm not going to tell you. I'm just going to show you. And that's my favorite thing. It's my favorite thing. Because I'll always tell them, if you make me believe it, then it's good. Because that's what we're here for, to believe in this story. And so I really, I love directing because I love working with actors, because that's how things turn, like that, like words on a page, they just sound like me. Like they all just sound like, no matter how good at writing dialogue I get, to me, those words will always just sound like me. But once these actors say them, then it's like, holy crap, these are people. These are real people. And so it's better than I could have imagined. Yeah, I really, I acted like a little bit in high school and college. And I feel like that experience of just knowing what it feels like or knowing what it feels like to have a director tell you, do this thing, or give me this emotion, or be here instead of there. I think that it gives you a little bit of empathy for actors, because it's hard. It's
we do have a question from Alan Linda Lerner, who wondered if you ever considered playing Selah yourself.
Oh my God, the number of people who've said that to me is really annoying. No, I never considered playing Selah myself. I always wanted her to be a teenager, played by a teenager. That was important to me, because I think that there's just something about an actual teenager that is really hard to mimic and really hard to fake. I think it's just like what's going on inside your head, and the duality of being a child and an adult at the same time, or being independent and also very dependent at the same time. You can't really fake that. So Selah was always going to be a teenager.
So I have a question for Chaz. What other projects are you involved with? And I think this is for both of you, for fans of Selah and the Spades. Are there some films in the works that are in a similar vein? Or another audience member wanted to know if maybe, who do you consider your peers who are doing similarly interesting work? So maybe starting with Chaz, kind of what other projects you're working on.
Okay, I have the Ebert Production Company and Black Leopard Productions. And I am working on some other projects. You know, I call some of my projects hidden figure projects from, you know, they are usually Black women who maybe you've heard of, but you don't know a lot about, or some that you really haven't heard of. Even the portrayal of, you know, of Selah was something that you don't see on the screen all the time. And that was important to me. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to support that project. I'm working with Lateef Calloway on sort of a movie or series about Sojourner Truth. You've heard of her from history, but a lot of people don't really know how important she was to American history, and how important she was to the women's suffragette movement, and how important she was just to helping other people come out of slavery and go into, you know, seek some sort of economic stability. I have, I'm working with Wendy Wolverton on a project. She's a cowgirl, and we're working on a project about Stagecoach Mary. Stagecoach Mary was a real woman she was the first African-American woman, the first woman, period, who drove a stagecoach for the United States Post Office. And this is so, I mean, her story is so amazing. In 2015, the Montana Cowboy Hall of Fame inducted her because she was so important in you know, in the Wild West.
Okay.
And it is, you know, that, so I like stories like this about just about all these wonderful women and that you don't really hear about.
Mhm. I love that.
Yep. So just to be mindful of time, I'm gonna go with two more questions. One is going to be from Greg Gillen. We have a question about, I found the photo shoot scene super unique in the way it was put together. So why did you choose to edit the scene the way that you did?
The photo shoot scene. The Spirit Squad?
I think it's the Spirit Squad.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, great question. Okay. That's what I thought. So okay, so the wild thing about that scene is it transitions from clearly reality, where it's this bluer tone, they're sweaty and running suicides in the gym, wearing their gym uniforms, and then it sort of switches into this idealized world, I guess is the best way to say it. And it is meant to feel like a call to action. It is meant to feel like Selah is like putting or like casting a spell over Paloma and being like, come, join us, join the girls. Like, yes, you too can feel this power. You too can look into the camera like this. You won't always be behind it. You can look into it like this. You can have this power that we have here to control your vision. So it was meant to feel like magic a little bit, like meant to feel like David Bowie in the Labyrinth. That sort of like it's meant to cast a spell, and that's why it feels so removed from reality, and it feels like you're watching a music video almost, or it feels like you're watching a dance sequence, and it doesn't feel like a movie anymore. It feels like it stands alone. That's why it's meant to draw you in.
Well, and I also think
I forgot one other thing. I better mention this, because all the movies aren't just about strong Black women. I'm also working on a film called Revival, based on a graphic novel by Tim Selah, and it does have a strong protagonist woman. I am interested in movies about women, and it's a film that kind of reminds me of the pandemic that's going on right now. It's a sort of a horror, spiritual, but anyway, it's based on a graphic novel. So I didn't want to.
Revival?
Revival.
I just want to write it down.
Revival, yes.
Take notes.
Yeah, you should read that story. It's really interesting graphic novel.
So I guess one more question. I'm going to just combine a couple that have been asked. So this is again for Tyresha, like maybe what your inspirations are. What are other films or projects that have inspired you, and are there other people kind of that you consider, your peer, that you consider your peers, that whose work you might recommend? I think people are being inspired by your film and wondering kind of where else to look for work. And then the last question is, what's next for Selah and what's next for you?
Are there filmmakers? There's a lot of film. I don't even know what my peers. Who do I think of as my peer? I don't know. But filmmakers I'm interested in. I'm always looking at whatever Terrence Nance is doing, because he is always challenging my idea of what film is, and I'm trying to figure out what film means for me in the future and going forward. So I'm always looking at his work. There's this other filmmaker who I love, who's done, I think she's working on developing I think she's working on financing her first feature now, but she's got a lot of stuff in the short space. Nikiatu Jusu, she's, oh my God, Nikiatu, if you see this video and I pronounce your last name wrong, I'm so sorry. But she's brilliant. She does this, like, she has this short, this vampire short called Suicide by Sunlight that I think might be on Vimeo right now. And if it is, I recommend everybody go see it. But I think she's really brilliant. And I'm really drawn to her and her work and the things that she says, because I don't think that I could ever make what she makes. Like I love it. And I'm like, I don't know how you do this. So I'm really drawn to people who, I guess, don't do what I do. I'm really drawn to people who do what I think is like I can't even understand how you do this. That's what I like to watch, because I I don't know. I like to feel surprised. And I think that there are two filmmakers who are constantly surprising me. But also, if you go to Nikki Atu's Twitter, she says everything that I've ever wanted to say about anything. And so I also just like her as a person. But those are two that really stand out for me. And in terms of what's next for Selah, well, the movie's out. And there you go. The movie is done. That's it. And there's still, we're developing a thing, a series with Amazon in the world of the film. And I can't say anything else.
Great.
But
Okay.
things are
Thank
coming.
you both so much. Chaz, we look forward to seeing your upcoming films. And Tyresha, good luck with your next project. Thank you I'm so glad the film's out in the world for everyone to see, and go back and watch it again. Thank you. Have a great night. And
Thank you.
see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.